Welcome to the Protecting Your Nest podcast. I was fortunate to have Professor Tim Noakes on last week's podcast. As many of you may already know, Professor Noakes tweeted that breastfed babies could be weaned onto a low-carb, high-fat diet. The Health Professions Council of South Africa accused him of unprofessional conduct for giving unconventional advice to a breastfeeding mother. The tweet dates back to 2014. The science supported Professor Noakes, however, and he was first acquitted in April 2017, including an appeal that followed. But it took 4 years of his life to end that entire process. Dr. Gary Fettke is a orthopedic surgeon who was sanctioned in 2016 by regulators of the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Agency for recommending a low-carb lifestyle to his patients that he felt would improve their health by changing their lives. Dr. Fettke was officially silenced by the agency and therefore forbidden to give diet-related advice to his patients. Eventually, the Australian agency repealed this decision in a written apology, which stated the following: I would like to take this opportunity to apologize for the errors that were made when dealing with this notification. We apologize, or we recognize that these errors are likely to have compounded any distress that you experience as a result of being the subject of this investigation. These are just two examples of what can happen when clinicians do not have, or don't follow what is considered the standard of nutritional advice, even when the standard is not based on well-done, randomized controlled studies, which are considered the gold standard. What are clinicians who teach carbohydrate restriction to do to avoid this from happening to them? Today's guest may have found at least one critical solution. Doug Reynolds is the founder and CEO of LowCarb USA, with an initial goal of providing a platform through an annual conference for internationally renowned scientists and medical practitioners to present the ever-increasing body of evidence of the benefits of reducing carbohydrates in the diet and, of course, adding healthy fats. His new project, which I'm excited about, is the Satiety of Metabolic Health Practitioners, which I am a proud member of, which represents all researchers and practitioners working to improve metabolic health and support evidence-based nutritional approaches, of course, training, and of course, that training is in carb restriction as a valid therapeutic option or intervention. So, Doug, I am so excited about this society, and I want to welcome you to Protecting Your Nest.
Thanks so much for having me, man.
Well, let me tell you, I'm just really excited, and I've been following you. You're one of the first people I kind of identify because of LowCarb USA, and it's really been wonderful. But to get us started, I want to first of all say hi to your wonderful partner in crime, Pam Devine. And I wanted to ask you the same question I asked the Unwins when I interviewed them from the UK. And I was curious what led you guys to each other. Do you have a story to tell? And I'm sure that our listeners would love to know how you guys became partners.
Yeah, it's a kind of a long story. At the time, I was working I was an engineer in developing set-top boxes, satellite TV set-top boxes, and I had got to a point where I was managing massive development projects for these things. In particular, at the time, then I was working on one that we would delivering to B Sky B in the UK, and in order to get the thing finalized and launched and everything, I was basically living in Wales, and I would come home for every 6 or 8 weeks for like a weekend to try and put my life, because I lived in San Diego, so I had to come back and put my life back on the rails every time. And Pam was living up in the Bay Area, working there, and her parents lived in San Diego, and she happened to be traveling home that weekend as well. And it's a long story, but in the end, we ended up sitting next to each other in a bar restaurant type place. And it was like the most amazing thing. It was like I'd known her my whole life. Um, it, we just clicked. It was just the most amazing thing. And so we kind of sort of met up again a couple of times through the weekend, and then she went back to the Bay, and I went back to Wales. But we started to keep in contact, and then but it was like a long distance relationship. And back in those days, the social media wasn't anything like it is now. Um, and then I moved on to another project like a year or two later when I was living in India, and by then we'd become incredibly good friends, and it was amazing. We used to like she would tell me about videos that she had got on DVR, or movies that she'd recorded on DVR, and I used to go down to the flea market in Bangalore and find the DVD of that movie. And then I would come back, and over the weekends, like I had this, there was no Zoom and all of that. I had a conference bridge that I used to use for our meetings with people all around the world, for our meetings. But on the weekend, we didn't use it. So I'd basically get a call in the bridge and I'd lock it so no one else could come in. And we'd literally spend the whole day together. She would like stay up right through the night because it was like the same time, or 12 hours opposite to us. And we would do that, like we would start. She would have the DVR and I'd have my DVD, and we'd say go, and we'd push play at the same time, and we'd literally watch the movie together.
Oh, wow.
And then we were on Facebook chat or something. I think it was like the only chat thing available at the time, and we just used to talk about like what was going on in the movie, about what was going on in our lives and everything, and we just became the most incredible friends. Without seeing very much of each other, and so the romance and that sort of developed more once I was home more, but it started with a solid friendship, and I think that's been the most powerful thing of everything.
Yeah, that warms my heart because that sounds pretty romantic to me, pushing play at the same time.
Yeah.
I love that story. So that's awesome. I'm a sucker for romantic stories, so I'm glad you shared that with me and my audience. I just think that's awesome. So we now have a sense of the roots of how you guys got started. I really appreciate that. So thanks. And it's funny because I've heard that 1 out of 4 relationships nowadays start with Facebook these days. So things are really changing. So it's nice to know that you guys had a slightly different start, but it worked. So that's good news. Yeah, that's excellent. One of the things I wanted to bring up is my last podcast interview was with our great Professor Tim Noakes. And one of the things I noticed was that you guys have a few things in common. You spent some time in South Africa. You guys are both passionate about sharing the low carb message, and you both have history as distance runners. So I want you to go back and share your thoughts about, how your diet affected your ability to be a really good runner. Because I know that I know Professor Tim Noakes has some thoughts about that, but I wanted to hear yours.
Well, it's kind of the other way around. It's like the diet enabled me to keep running. I used to run you would have heard from Tim is that the Comrades Marathon was the big. It's like a cult in South Africa, right? 90 Ks or like about 55 miles, and I through my 30s in that I ran a whole bunch of them, and I was like bulletproof. And then, but as I got older and I was living here in the States, my knees started to hurt a lot. I was putting on a lot of like couple of pounds every month, not every month, every year. But over the years, I had put on 35 pounds over what I used to be back in my 30s when I used to run these races. And I was really struggling. I was hating it. And then I heard about this concept of the LCR. I didn't even know what a ketone was when I first heard about this. That's a genuine truth. And I started investigating it, and it explained everything that I was experiencing, and even the troubles that I had back in my 30s when I used to race, and it was all Tim's fault, because I would follow his recommendations about carb loading before the race, and then it was like on the day of the race I felt terrible, and so I pulled the trigger. I took Pam shopping, and which horrified her, and the fact that I had a list horrified her even more. But yeah, we went around the outside of the store, as we've all learned, and we're getting all the fresh food and the meat and the full cream Greek yogurt and heavy whipping cream and all of that stuff. Yeah, we just started doing it, and it changed my life. I wasn't really sick that I knew of. I didn't have diabetes. I wasn't morbidly obese. I didn't have cardiovascular disease or any of those things. But I was pretty miserable. I was hurting. Everything was hurting. I felt like a slug. I wasn't enjoying running anymore. I wasn't enjoying life anymore. And that all changed like really quickly. That's...
Yeah.
And so as my knees cleared up and my weight came off and I started to feel more energetic, I started to enjoy running again. And so now I really still enjoy running again, which for a long period of time, I really wasn't. I was just doing it because I felt I needed to, because I was putting on this weight and I had to stop putting on this weight. But as we've learned in this community, that, just trying to run it off, it just doesn't work.
It doesn't. You can't out-exercise a bad diet. And you remind me of Michelle Hearn, who was a previous guest in her wonderful book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. But during the interview, she talked about how she shared the story, how she was like in the tub after running, felt horrible, and she just couldn't keep going. But then when she made these dietary changes, and she went all the way to carnivore, things just got better for us. So absolutely sounds exactly like her story. So it's really a healing for anybody listening who who's struggling. You just have to do an experiment, just a N of one. Just do your own experiment, and it'll probably shock you how much better you'll feel taking these dietary approaches. So thank you for sharing that. But I've also heard a little bit about your history with a traumatic brain injury. And I really want you to share your story about what led to that injury. But more importantly, how did your diet impact your brain? Because it sounds like it definitely helped. Your running got better and easier. But what about your brain health?
Yeah, that was amazing side benefit of this whole thing. I just finished my military service. I was literally on that Monday about to start work on the mines, which I had a bursary, a scholarship from Anglo American, from the mining, and I actually went to run a triathlon with a friend of mine in a town outside Johannesburg called Klerksdorp. And funny enough, that is where the gold mine was that I was. So I was literally due to go back there on the Monday to start work, but the triathlon was there on the Saturday. And coming home back to Johannesburg after the race, we had a very bad motor car accident, and I ended up with this brain injury. Back in those days, no one knew what TBI was or anything, but I was pretty messed up. I couldn't see for about 3 months, and I could see, but I couldn't focus. So if I looked with just one eye, I could kind of see okay. But when I looked with both eyes, the focal points couldn't meet. People said to me it was like really weird to talk to me. It was like talking to a chameleon, because my eyes would actually move independently of each other. It was really disconcerting for them. They didn't even want to look at me when they were talking. But there was a bunch of other horror stories about things that I did and how I was talking and behaved during that time. But eventually, my vision started to come back after about 3 months, and finally, I went back to work. And in that time, I'd actually managed to find a job developing, actually doing stuff for engineering for for a Navy working on the submarines, but it was in Johannesburg, so I just stayed there. I didn't have to go out to the mines, and that was where I started. But I found that what was really badly affecting me, my biggest problem was my short-term memory. Like literally, I tell people this might even happen while we're doing this thing, is that if I get slightly sidetracked in my thoughts while I'm trying to talk, I go blank and I completely forget what I was trying to say. And sometimes if you remind me, I'll get it back, and sometimes I never do,
Mm-hmm.
And so that led to a massive fear for me, speaking in public. Like I was an engineer, and if I had to try and do a presentation of my design or something like that, it used to terrify me. And often I would try and get someone else to, especially as I became more senior, then I get like a more junior guy to do the presentation, And so when I started Low Carb USA, when I very first started planning it, I had the intention of finding an MC, but I never really found the right person. And so as we got right up to the event, I suddenly decided, you know what, I actually think I can do this. And I attribute that to a number of things. First of all, Georgia Ede talks about this a lot, and I've heard a lot of other people talk about it, that this whole low carb lifestyle seems to help a lot with anxiety and stuff like that. And I just wasn't nervous about it. It didn't freak me out,
Mm-hmm.
And what I did also find was that the occurrence of me going blank while I was talking happened much less frequently. And so it's not completely healed, but I'm much better than I used to be. And so that, combined with the fact that I wasn't anxious about it, I thought, you know what, I can do this. And especially with this community, I feel like I'm amongst friends, and people, I realize that people are okay with it. And it's happened to me on stage a couple of times. And I went through like probably 2 conferences where it didn't happen to me at all. And then the third one,
Mm-hmm.
the funniest thing was I was actually introducing Georgia Ede. She was standing on the side of the stage, and I was introduced, and I forgot. I just went blank. I forgot what I was trying to say, and I just like stared at people, And eventually, I just said, "Sorry, everyone, Georgia Ede," and I just called her up onto the stage, and I ran off, Um, and when I came back on the stage afterwards, I kind of explained, okay, this is my story, and next time I stand and look at you like a deer in the headlights, someone in the front row kind of try and tell me what I was talking about, and hopefully I'll remember, So for me, like I said, I'm not completely healed, but I'm much better than I was. I hope that to keep improving. But over and above that, I'm not afraid of it anymore. And I think that's the big thing, is that it doesn't rule my life anymore. And that's massive. It really is.
Yeah, it is. And, anybody listening or watching this podcast can feel and hear the authenticity in who you are. One thing that we have to be comfortable with is who we are. As a physician, I have to know my limitations. I have to be comfortable with that. I have to be able to express that. And I think that, you being comfortable in that space is really remarkable. And it also teaches us about even this podcast. We're doing a video version of this as well as audio, but, I could edit my audio, but I'm at the point now where I just record and just go with it. Like, I think we have to be comfortable with that. And what I'm learning, particularly as I'm starting to think about making more videos, people want to see authenticity. They don't want to see polished. And so I think that and when you're amongst friends, you're in pretty good shape anyway. But But then even when you're not amongst friends or people who don't see the world the way you do, your confidence is there. So it doesn't matter. So I really appreciate that. And I'm so happy that this way of eating has helped you. And I'm hoping that people who are listening who have had a similar experience, whether it's the mood aspect or the fact that they've had to recover from a brain injury, I think that's wonderful. And speaking of that, there are many benefits of restricting carbs. I think for me, I've been pretty blessed. I haven't had a lot of health problems. I never had a weight problem, but I did have a little irritable bowel. And those things seem to just go away. I did have some aching in my hands, which, with a family history of arthritis, I knew that was kind of headed my way. And those two things just kind of faded away. But the thing that I also benefited from for a different reason, which is the mental clarity. So the mental clarity is like incredible. And when you do this type of work, you need to have that. When you're in school, as we talked about before we started, you have to have it. And I'm able to focus. And when I did a podcast with my kids, Brandon and Justin Hampton, that's the thing that they celebrated the most. They were able to do very well in school when they decided to do a low carb diet. And they also did intermittent fasting. It just changed their lives. So, but I am curious for you, beyond what you've shared, what other parts of your health improved when you started a low carb diet?
Well, I think I mentioned it a bit earlier. I think my knees were starting to hurt like really badly, to the point where I was really almost not running at all because it was hurting so much. That cleared up in about, I don't know, 3 weeks. And I used to come back from martial arts. Like, my recovery was just so much better. At that age now, I'm 52 years old or something, and we were doing martial arts classes, and we were doing 2 back-to-back classes twice a week instead of going every night. And I would come back from those things at 8:00 at night, and I would be shattered, and get up in the morning and really struggle to get to the restroom. And I'd sit on the toilet and my head in my hands thinking, man, I'm getting old. This is terrible. And 3 weeks into this, I was bouncing out of bed and going for a run in the morning. And to me, that is special. Skin issues on my ears that seem to clear up, respiratory issues that, like, I can literally sleep through the night, breathe through my nose the whole night, and not wake up and feel like someone died in my mouth, because I've been snoring and breathing through my mouth the whole night. You mentioned mental clarity and stuff like that. That, for me especially, it's amazing. I get up I wake up. I haven't used an alarm for probably 4.5 years now, 5 years. And I literally wake up at around 4:30 every morning, and I get up, go to the restroom, come to my desk and sit down and start working. And that's like, I don't need a cup of coffee or anything. It's just like, this lights on, and because of that, I go to bed relatively early, like 10 o'clock's my thing. I get grumpy if it's like after 10 and I'm not in bed, but I literally, Pam actually gets upset a bit, but it's like, I literally go and lie down and within seconds I'm asleep. And both of those things, waking up easily and going to sleep easily. And I get 6.5 hours sleep on average, and I'm never tired, and I feel great. So, those are all things that I wasn't counting on or expecting when I embarked on this journey.
Right. You're preaching to the choir. I go to bed at 9:30 and wake up at 4:30. And I'm like you in that 6.5 hours is pretty much a sweet spot. Of course I target 7, but sometimes I'll just wake up at 6.5 hours. So I don't, so in fact, ironically, I'll have a sleep expert on my next episode for next week. And I'm doing that also because I did some research for a column that I'm writing for the Diet Doctor, which will actually come out the same day that we release this episode. And we talk about sleep, but man, getting enough sleep is a game changer. And And I sympathize for all of those people out there who struggle with that, because not going to sleep is horrible. Waking up tired is horrible. So again, what I love about this dietary approach is that it does, for a lot of people, fix that. And it's huge. And it just changes who you are as a person. So really appreciate that as well. I'm curious, since we're talking about diet, and you're the founder of LowCarb USA. So curious minds want to know what the founder of LowCarb USA eats, right? So give us an idea. If I were dining with you right now, what would I expect to have on my dinner plate that you would share, you and Pam would share with me?
Meat. um, you know what? It's evolved. When we first started doing this, and I think a lot of people like that. They're like so fearful of what they might. You don't understand that if you don't eat bread and pasta, you're not actually missing out any nutrients, right?
That's right. It's
But so
flour.
we were so focused on like the right vegetables, spinach and kale and broccoli and cauliflower and those things. All had a lot more vegetables than I used to have, and all sorts of awesome ways of making it. Normally with a bunch of cheddar cheese and stuff like that. And then obviously some kind of meat dish. I've come from South Africa, so we meat lovers. And so it would have been a steak or something from a roast, or we do a lot of fish, like especially salmon and stuff like that. Every now and then a chicken. We love duck as well, although it's just more difficult to come by here. But any sort of protein source that's particularly fatty, which is something that I was always used to avoid like the plague. And now that's what makes this so wonderful, is that everything tastes great now, because you're allowed the ribeye steak
How
instead
was
of.
it at first? Like when you first started, right? How hard was it to deal with that fat, like to eat it?
Yeah,
Because
so
that's a big change
that's
from us.
that's actually my part of my story that I'm trying to keep it short here. But the very first thing we did after I'd gone shopping with Pam was I bought these ribeye steaks. Before we used to I used to look for the fillets and stuff like that, and cut every little piece of fat off it before I even cooked it. Now I've got this ribeye steak, and
Yeah.
we had a fire outside in this complex that we were living in. And I went out and I cooked these two steaks, and I came back with them on the plate. This was the very first meal after we decided to pull the trigger. And these now the ribeye steaks have got all this fat in amongst the meat and everything. And there's even fat like slushing a lot in the bottom of the plate. And I have such a vivid memory of literally giggling hysterically. Like, am I really seriously going to eat this? And I the first few bites, I actually had to gag it down, because I had programmed my brain so much against fat that it actually turned my stomach. And but I'd read all of this stuff and done all of this research, and I believed that this was the right thing, and so I ate it. But by the time I got to the end of eating that steak, it was like, you know what? That actually tastes pretty good. Like,
Right.
in the process of 10 minutes of eating that steak, I went from hating fat to loving it again. And
Wow.
it wasn't difficult for me, and I always battled to understand people who kept saying it was so difficult. It was because suddenly Pam couldn't get me out of the kitchen. She couldn't get me in the kitchen before. Now she couldn't get me out of the kitchen. I used to chase her out. I was so looking forward to the next meal and cooking it myself and helping her. And it was just the most amazing thing. Like suddenly food tasted good. And all these things that I'd been banned from eating since I was a youngster, I was allowed to eat again. And so giving up pasta and potatoes and rice and stuff was like, but stuff that tastes good is the stuff you put on that anyway. So I can still eat that. So who cares about not being able to have the pasta and stuff? The one thing I'd over the years got I was eating so much chocolate. It was just terrifying when I think back. And I did think that I would struggle with that, and I didn't, because I was so looking forward to the other food that I never used to before. That the chocolate was probably just somewhere, at least something tasted good by the end of the meal. Now suddenly everything in the meal tasted good. Plus, I think I was much more satiated, and so I didn't feel like, okay, now what else do I eat? And they've got this. I used to have this big bowl of these malt balls. It was like a honeycomb thing that was covered in chocolate. It was delicious, and yet I think about it now and I think, yeah, it's delicious, but I don't pine for it, and I've never eaten another one since that first day, literally. So,
wow, I
yeah,
love it.
if stuff tastes good, it's easy to sustain as far as I'm concerned. But I'm not. What I did come to realize, and working a lot with Doc Robert Sivers and stuff like that, that I've come to appreciate the concept of carbohydrate addiction and sugar addiction. And I do realize that I actually was lucky enough not to be one of those folks, where I didn't have that addiction. I ate a lot of it because I was a runner and I thought I could, but not because I didn't become addicted to it. And so, giving it up for something that tasted better anyway, it wasn't difficult for me at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I tell patients, I refer patients to the interview, post podcast interview I did with Dr. Joan Iflin with the Reset community. And in that YouTube, so anybody listening, just type in my name and Dr. Joan Iflin, and she goes through the 11 diagnostic criteria. And the reality is, her Reset community is literally like an AAA for people who have processed food addictions. I'm like you, I don't really have a true addiction, but for those who do, it's incredibly important to get extra help. I also want to comment on this idea that people say, well, it's hard to eat this way. It's not sustainable. Well, I don't know. For me, eating steak is very sustainable. Adding fat to my food or having fat in it is very sustainable. And when you do a low carb keto diet or carnivore, you have to add salt. So now you mean to tell me I can cook with salt and fat? That's probably going to taste pretty good. So I think, for those who are listening, try it out, because the dietary approach is amazing. And I was a vegetarian for 8 years, so that was my identity. So it was really odd to shift in a completely different direction. But as people who follow science, literally you have to follow the science, and the science will pretty much tell you what you need to know. So let's go ahead and turn our discussion to the Satiety. And as you heard, I started today's podcast sharing the stories of Professor Noakes and Dr. Fettke. And, they were considered outliers because they were not following what we call the standard of care. So I think that understanding what that means matters. So from your perspective, when you think about the Satiety and the purpose of it, how would you define what a standard of care is so that people can understand it?
So I go back to the legal definition, because I had no clue before until Adele Height helped me to understand that. And it was all part of a conversation we had a couple of years ago in 2018 that led to her eventually developing the clinical guidelines that we have, and eventually that moving on to becoming or turning into this society. But one of the things that she did in those early conversations, when she was trying to convince me that we needed to do more than just put on a couple of conferences, was she sent me this document with all of her ideas about what we needed to do. And one of the things was, she was on a jury in a malpractice suit, and the judge explained to her or to the jury before they retired, saying, this is what standard of care is. And I've got it here, and if you wouldn't mind, I can just read it. And it says, standard of care is defined as providing health care in accordance with the standards of practice among members of the same healthcare profession with similar training and experience, and situated in the same or similar communities at the time the healthcare is rendered. In other words, standard of care does not come from what is taught in professional training, from public health policy, or even from clinical care guidelines, although these can inform and help define the SOC. Rather, standard of care comes from what a community of clinicians do in the actual provision of care.
I like that. That's
So
way better than
it's a consensus, right? So if
I like
if
that.
for a particular case, if we have to poll 100 of you guys
hmm
who all work in the same environment, what would most of you say would be the right course of action? That's standard of care. And so her idea was, we need to establish standard of care around carbohydrate reduction. The carb eaters are not the same. Our metabolisms have shifted. Our metabolisms have changed.
hmm
And so how can the same standard of care apply to us? And what I love about what we did and really coming from Adele is that we're not arguing with anybody. We're not tooting our horn. We're not saying we found a new way. We're not saying we're right and you're wrong. What we're saying is that maybe there's an alternative. And for those of you who feel like reducing carbohydrates in your life might help your health, your metabolic health, then maybe come and be a part of this community and learn from us and see if it's something that might help you. And I think, and I'm sure it's going to happen at some point, but whenever we put stuff out on Twitter, and especially on Twitter, because that's the most aggressive one, get very little,
Yeah.
pretty much no trolling, right? So there's very few people. Every now and then someone gets on their bandwagon and shouts odds or something, but everybody else just shuts them down because they don't know what they're talking about. But because we're
Right.
because we're not trying to generate conflict, there isn't conflict, and so we're able to go about our work and do good for the people who can benefit from it, and those who don't choose to don't have to. We're not saying they're wrong, just they choose it. They choose in a different way or a different path, and so it's been pretty cool from that perspective.
But that's the, and I really like that definition. And I really want to do a shout out to Adele Height. I did have her on a previous episode. She's brilliant, and I'm so thankful that she's available to us to help us, walk this walk. I just think that we're really moving in the right direction, and metabolic health just kind of does what you said. It keeps the tension low, because who wouldn't want to achieve metabolic health? Now, if you can do it as a vegan or a vegetarian, like, and probably both of our previous lives, that's fine. But at the end of the day, it's important that people understand the big goals. So that makes a lot of sense. So I really appreciate that. And I was thinking about some other. So we have a standard that we can kind of lean on and use as a guidepost, not the rule, but the guidepost. And we also have the work of other great researchers and docs like Dr. Richard Feynman, Dr. Eric Westman, Jeff Volek, and of course Steve Finley and others. And they're doing great work because they're providing research and things that we can use. In fact, when I did my, I was mentioning to you, I was finishing some work in my research class, and I had to present. And my paper ended up being, comparing low carb to low fat. And I was trying to present a case to support that, which is fairly easy when you think about all the research that has been done. So we need those guys to do that work. We need the work of Adele Height, and we also need the society to do its work. So my question is, what role do you think the Society of Metabolic Health, practitioners, what role will they play in bringing this metabolic health to the mainstream?
Tony, I think you mentioned it. I think we were still off air at the time, at the beginning. But you said that finding LowCarb USA, you'd found a home. But I think this takes us this an order of magnitude, greater than that. It's this huge step forward where Now it's a legitimate home. The clinical guidelines that we developed have migrated over from LowCarb USA to this organization. Now they have a real home. The library of papers and research that we used to reference on LowCarb USA has migrated over as well. All the tools that we're making available to practitioners, but more than anything, it gives them this umbrella organization to lend legitimacy to what they're doing. If they feel that they want to offer this as an option in their practice to their patients, that they can feel comfortable to do it. Now, someone's got their back. Someone like nobody had Gary Fettke's back. No one had Tim's back. But now there's an organization, and a lot of it is because those cases that they stood up and to be counted, they've set a precedent. And so now we can point to that, and we can point to the clinical guidelines, and the people, including Gary and Tim, are both on our panel of advisors for those clinical guidelines. But it's a real document now that people who were on the fence before, who was afraid that they couldn't even talk to their patients about it because it's not standard of care. And now they have this organization that has their back. And I feel like that's what we're really going to bring to the table, And something else, just talking about people being afraid of standard of care, that I learned from Adam Pike, who was actually one of Tim's lawyers during that whole trial that he had. I did a podcast with him, and something that he explained, because we started to bring up this thing about people being afraid because it's not standard of care. And he said, there's this concept of patient autonomy. And what I hope people listening to this will realize as well is that if you have a concept that is, especially if it's got a lot of documented research and science behind it, but it's not considered standard of care. If you present this option to your patient and you present the standard option, the standard of care option to your patient, and explain the pros and cons of both, and your patient chooses a particular course of treatment, and it happens to be the low-carb one in this case, then the standard of care is not an issue, because the patient has a choice, and the patient made an informed choice and asked you basically to continue with this treatment. And I love that, because that even before it gets recognized as official standard of care, doctors and physicians are actually protected if they go about it the right way, and they make sure that their patient is properly educated on the whole gamut of options, and then they get to make the choice. And that's cool, I think.
Yeah. And no matter what happens moving forward, and I think we're all fairly optimistic that this way, carb restriction seems to be the logical answer. However, we always want to live in a world where clinicians are able to have some discretion. We want them to be knowledgeable about what the options are, and a lot of times the clinician, they're not, because they're not taught nutrition. But we do want to live in a world where we have discretion. I mean, in Advocate Aurora Healthcare, where I work, I have the discretion to focus a little bit more on low carb keto. And that's a choice I've made based on my research, and I'm getting extra training, board certified in obesity medicine, getting a master's in nutrition. All of these things are, but I don't have an organization telling me I can't do that. And we do want to live in a world where people have choice. I mean, Adele Height would say we don't need any dietary guidelines, period. I mean, I understand why she would say that. I think Nina Teicholz is fighting to fix it, but until it's fixed, is it really possible to fix it? Really, I mean, no matter what they come up with, is it really the answer? And the answer is probably not. So I think that I just want people to have choice. I mean, people have choice. So I really appreciate those thoughts, because I am totally there with you. One quick question about we kind of touched on this, but the language of carb restriction and keto, your low carb USA. Just a few more thoughts about why you guys really decided to go with metabolic health.
Yeah.
Any additional thoughts about that?
So, I mean, for the same reason that we called it Low Carb USA instead of Keto USA, right?
Right,
I mean,
right.
what we were trying to do is make sure that we didn't alienate certain, so if it was about keto, then the paleo people and the primal people and the Mediterranean people and people that just wanted to, or the no sugar people, that's not necessarily keto, but in fact it's not keto, but their mind's in the same place. They have the same fundamental philosophies, and so we wanted to, although we talked the majority of the time about keto, it wasn't only about keto, and we wanted to make sure that we welcomed anybody in. But since then, even low carb has become LCHF. Low carb has become back in those days when we started it, it was like a very unknown term almost. So now everybody's heard it to some extent, and a lot of people have an anti about it or against it. And or preconceived ideas that it's really difficult to break down walls. But like you even said exactly that. Who wouldn't want metabolic health, right? And so, Eric Westman had a lot to do with coming up with that name. And it was about lifestyle and dietary interventions as opposed to drugs to achieve metabolic health, whatever that is, and you will find that the LCHF option for a lot of people, maybe even most people, dare I say, would be the right option. But for some people, it's not, for numerous reasons, religious, family issues, and even in some cases, physiologically, where it literally just doesn't work.
That's right.
We have to be open to that. We have to recognize that there are possibly other lifestyle interventions that may help somebody with a particular condition. And if we can help reverse that or at least halt its progression, then we've helped them. And that doesn't mean they have to be keto, or it doesn't mean that they have to be LCHF, or they don't have to be paleo. They just have to change something in their life. You talked about it, about sleep and stress and stuff. Maybe it's just about eliminating those things is enough. To just changing that in your lifestyle might be enough to reverse this, whatever this condition is that these people have. And so it's not about keto. It's about becoming healthy. And
that's
I'm
right.
so glad
and
that Eric
all of those things are game changers.
Yeah, I'm really glad that Eric Westman kind of continued to harp on the idea that this is what we should focus on when we were looking for a name, because I think at the end of the day, it's by far the best option that we could have come up with.
Yeah. Well, you can kind of, when you think about In Your Carb Confusion, his book with Amy Berger, it's really just a practical view from 30,000 feet in the plane. And we get a little too focused on, do we have ketones in our urine and all of these things. At the end of the day, we can relax a little bit and we'll be able to achieve our goals if we would just, take it down a notch. And again, as we talked about earlier before we started, this whole nest and rope acronym is all about, what else in your life needs to be fixed. And if you don't, if you ignore some of those other things like relationships, then you're probably going to still have a high blood pressure. I've had people see me and they retire and then they were on 3 medicines. Maybe they hadn't made the lifestyle change, but just because they retired, they get off of 2 of their medicines. For some reason, the job was, whether it's a principal or an engineer, it was the stress of the job. So a lot of times those things shouldn't be ignored. And the good thing is, if you focus on those things that are obvious, like sleep and stress, a lot of times you won't have to worry about that prescription. So I think that there's a lot of ways of looking at it, but I think that's perfect. I am curious. So we have we have guidelines. We have an organization that's here to kind of be a family, a place where we can all kind of, feel comfortable and support each other. And it becomes like this standard that a lot of us are doing the same thing. So it creates this kind of standard based on that definition. When you think about the American Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, do you think that having this organization in place will help move the needle in terms of the work that they're doing? Because we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to help people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you think they will hear our voices a little louder than in the past?
I think so. Someone came up with the slogan that became our slogan, was one voice for metabolic health, right? So I know Rob Sivers is very big on this, that now it's uniting all of these splinter groups so that we have a unified voice. And I think it's going to be louder than he talks about grains of sand, and you drop grains of sand in the lake and you don't need anything, but you put all those grains of sand and make a brick. You throw it in there, it makes a splash and a lot of ripples, right? So it's the
That's
same
right.
thing. I think that we started to lose my track here. What were we talking about?
Yeah. Just the fact that well, look, you know what? We're equal now. So that's funny. It's funny. I think about what you said earlier about how the brain works. And even as you shared your story about that, it was funny because I was like, I hadn't had anything happen, but I think it's because we're multitasking our thoughts, right? So for me, what I find is that if I'm thinking about the next question, or if I'm, trying to, what happens is you lose your way. So some of it may just be the fact that we have a lot of things that we're focusing on, but it's complex. So, but we're good. We'll just kind of get the next thought going. And it's actually a personal question, to be honest. It's like dealing with communities of color and how, communities of color are disproportionately impacted by metabolic disease. And there's so many: dementia, diabetes, hypertension, all of these metabolic conditions. And we know that the society is going to have an impact, but the impact may be even greater in communities of color. So have you had conversations about how the society could potentially impact that community more?
Well, Tony, you're putting yourself on the spot here.
Uh-oh.
Because if you basically back in August, when we had you were part of a breakout talk that we did with the Noakes Foundation and the Eat Better South Africa. What I loved about them was their pilot projects of going into these poorer communities, and there it was like a small village or something like that, where they could put their arms around and put a blanket around it, basically. And then go in there and change everything, provide the food, provide the medical support, provide everything, monitor it, show this amazing, and there have been amazing results. And then you can build out your pilot study to try and get into the greater community. And we were talking about trying to do something here in the States with that. And Gurpreet Patel was, I forget if he actually even managed to get onto that panel discussion, but he's been doing some great work as well. And I talked to you then about one of the committees that we have earmarked but haven't created yet is an outreach committee. And I think it's going to be massively important. And, Gurpreet's already doing a bunch of work in your communities. So are you. So the two of you are really are a starting point. Vivian Lowe is also very, very keen to get involved in that as well. And so, maybe we go with the three of you and we start, but we need to start a committee. And I know all of us are hectically busy, but somehow we've got to be able to carve out a bit of time to to make this happen, because I think I think it's massively important. And I think the reason that the Noakes Foundation started this Eat Better South Africa thing was that they started to get criticized that this was an elitist, middle class, white thing, because it was more expensive and blah, 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 which we can show it's not. But that was the perception. And I would hate it to be perceived as that here as well. And I think maybe we can get ahead of the curve here and start to try and address those communities sooner than later, so that people can't point a finger at us and say, you excluding certain communities or whatever. We really, and a lot of the time, those communities need it more than anybody, and so we need to find a way to help them.
Well, I love it. Well, we are in our infancy when it comes to society, so I agree with you. Let's do it now. I don't edit my podcast videos, so I can't edit out what you're putting me on the spot. So it's real now. So I think the rest of the world will now know that I have to help lead this initiative with your leadership. So I will say raise my hand like I'm in court, and we'll make sure to make that happen. It's too important. And to be honest with you, one of my purposes, maybe because of who I am, is to make sure that community has a voice. So I absolutely will take that. And I appreciate you being committed on your end as well to helping that cause. So I'm happy I raised that question, and I'm happy that we have an action plan after this meeting. So let's make that happen. Another thing I wanted to bring up, I did, as I researched you a little bit, I saw the episode number 67 of the Low-Carb USA podcast with Dr. Andrew Aswawi, if I'm pronouncing that right. And I found that he was the first accredited clinician for the society. So just briefly, could you tell any clinician out there, and I know it's broader than just doctors, it's all kinds of clinicians, what does it mean to be accredited with the society?
I think it's one of the most important features, and especially, you need to be a member, obviously, to be accredited. But I think that whole legitimacy thing that we're talking about, it enables someone that I think it's a really good looking orange badge that really stands out, that says that you're accredited with the SMHP, that they may, if they choose to display on their website, on their stationery, they get to be able to display the credentials MHP behind their name for metabolic health practitioner. And so if anybody's looking on our list or anywhere else that they're looking for someone to help them with this concept of metabolic health or carb reduction or whatever, however they get into the conversation, when they see that someone's got MHP behind their name, or they have this accredited badge on their profile, that that they've been vetted. It's like people go to university and they become doctors, and you have this certificate on your wall that says that I'm qualified as a doctor now, and so people can come to you with confidence that you've had the training. Whereas if someone else just tries to tell them how they need to fix themselves, but they haven't done the training, you obviously, if you got a choice of you or the guy who hasn't done the training, who you're going to go to, right? And it's that same concept. It's like, okay, now you can be confident that these people have been properly vetted, that they've been properly trained, and you will know that as a doctor, especially, you don't get very little or no training on nutritional interventions, and so doctors need more than anything to be trained in this stuff. Until we're able to get it into the curricula at med schools, it's going to have to be tertiary training. It's going to have to be subsequent to their actual graduation as a doctor. But we provide that, and it's not like 4 years of university, but it's comprehensive enough that people understand the implications of changing the diet and what it can and can't do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's critical. And if I was looking for someone to help me, I would much rather go with someone that is accredited or recognized and certified through an official organization like this, than just someone that I found on the internet.
Right. Yeah. And it does fill gaps. What I like about it, and I've taken courses um, in the low carb space with the Nutrition Network, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and it does fill gaps. I mean, I was figuring out how to take people off their insulin with this methodology, but I didn't really have uh, a standard, and it was nice to be able to do that. I know Diet Doctor has some educational stuff as well. They have a free CME. It's a free CME. So it's like, those resources are available, and we want to take advantage of all the resources that you guys provide, Nutrition Network, Diet Doctor, et cetera. So it's really important that people understand that the resources are there, and you don't have to stand on the island by yourself, and you can actually stand on the shoulder of giants, is the way I like to say it. So thank you for those thoughts. And I do want to, as we kind of get near wrap up time, I want to understand a little bit clearer what your why is. What's your true north? How do you see the society and the Low Carb USA? Do you have some big goals? You're getting close to achieving them, in my mind. But how have you thought about the future? What would you like the world to look like in the future?
Wow. I think I would like it to be like smoking,
Mm-hmm.
where because you're never going to change everybody, right? Um, but with smoking, everybody knows that smoking's bad for you. Everybody knows that it will do all these things to you. Everybody knows that.
Right.
Some people still choose to smoke, and that's okay. That's their choice, right? But everybody knows. And I want to, I feel like my work's done when that's the same about LCHF and this diet or this intervention and this lifestyle. Is that everybody knows that this is, even if it's, because we're always trying to say it's not for everybody. I believe it's for most people, but at the very least, it's something you need to try, right? And when everybody knows that that's how they should be attempting to live, but I don't care. I love my chocolate. I love this. I'm going to eat it no matter what, and I don't care what it's going to do to me. That's your choice, and that's okay. I'm not here to judge you, but for everybody else, they have since they could read and write and listen, they've been hearing that these carbs and sugar are poisonous, and that you need to, I don't care who you are, you need to reduce the amount that it is that we as a society consume. Even if you don't go LCHF or low carb, even you need to cut a lot of this crap out of your life. And once we all know that and understand that, just as a matter of course, just like we know about smoking, then I don't know if we can really get any further than that, other than to just keep doing more and keep doing the research, keep trying to find more proof of what we say, or even find out some new stuff, right? Because I don't believe we know everything about everything, even close. So
Not even
just
close.
keep pushing the boundaries, keep learning, and
Yeah.
and have society accept that for the most part they really shouldn't be eating this rubbish.
And it's
Yeah,
that's perfect because
I feel like everybody
doesn't know.
No, and in this, I think
They
there's
just
so
don't.
many people that come into this community who want to become keto coaches and stuff like that, and that's why we doing what we do, because when you see the profound effect of it, you think, how the hell was I 51 years old and I didn't even know what a ketone was? How was I 51 years old and I didn't know this stuff? How is that possible?
Right.
And so
Or
we turn around and say, what can
trained
I
as a
do?
doctor.
It's like a natural, you feel obligated to think, geez, I have to help people understand what I didn't know. And I feel like people have a fundamental need to help people if they know they can, in some, if they have a skill or they have some knowledge that can help people. They have a fundamental need to impart that knowledge. And and the more people that learn and become and feel like that, that's the way we're gonna tip the threshold. We're gonna reach that threshold where suddenly it's become accepted. So, yeah.
That's a great answer. What I love about it is it keeps that what we talked about. The reason why we use metabolic health is a little bit more flexible. It's not as clearly defined as keto. You have to have a certain blah blah blah, and it just gives people some choice. But you can't have a choice if you don't even know what the choices are. If we live in a world where the American Diabetes Association, thankfully, they have low carb and very low carb as options now. But I mean, a few years ago, they were saying it was harmful or that you can only do it for a short amount of time. So I love this idea of here are your choices. We have a preference. As a physician, I always tell my patients, my preference is here. Here are your choices. You decide, but I'm just going to give you my selling point for either approach. And then we let people decide because, like you said, there's too many nuances to individuals that will decide or help them make a decision. Like you said, culture and all these other factors. So we don't want to get too judgy so thank you for that. And I guess I'll ask you about your own personal growth and, what are you going to focus on? Is it going to be, when you think about that nest and rope, all of those various aspects, nutrition, exercise, the relationships, how you think, what parts of your life do you really want to give additional attention this year?
Wow, there's so many.
Right.
I think yeah, no, none of us are perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I got sleep. I think I've got sleep down. I
Mm-hmm.
think the low carb thing has helped me tremendously with reducing stress in my life. But it's you still need to seek out. I continue to seek out situations and environments where it doesn't stress me out, and that goes for people as well. You need to surround yourself with good, positive people that you look up to, people that you respect, so that they hold you to a higher standard automatically.
Mm-hmm.
Don't surround yourself with negative people and people that are going to pull you down. And that's I constantly strive to extricate myself from situations and relationships that are poisonous.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize I've come to realize over time how many of those relationships and environments I was in. And I think we all, if you look
Mm-hmm.
at it carefully, there's so many things that are tearing us down, and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to continue to tear you down until you make a decision to get away from it or get out of it, or distance yourself from it. And sometimes that's hard, man, because sometimes it's family, and
Mm-hmm.
or someone who used to be your best friend or still is your best friend, but you're thinking, you know what, he was my best friend since I was in junior school, primary school, whatever, but he's messing with my head. I need to,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to make a choice. Do you continue to let him mess with your head, or
Mm-hmm.
do you distance yourself from that situation and find someone who can help build you up as opposed to tear you down. And those are the things I think I'm not necessarily very good at, but the things that I strive for. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm just looking at your list of things here. Nutrition and exercise. Obviously, nutrition. Where I stand on that. Exercise. We've started to incorporate. I was a runner and all of that, and I still try to do endurance stuff, but I've come to appreciate the importance of high intensity exercise so much more since I met up with Dr. Ben. And
yes, short and quick. I love it.
We Pam and I twice a week, 15 minutes. That's what we do, and it's just made such a big difference. And so I'm committed to continuing that, and also to helping as many people as possible understand how important that is. And it's so easy. Well, when I say that, we actually did my workout yesterday. Pretty tired at the end of it, pretty wrecked. Dr. Ben always says that's the best time when you're lying there and you've just finished your ab workout at the end of your workout. That's the best time, because first of all, you feel satisfied that you've done it, and also it's the longest time till you have to do it again.
Right.
The funniest thing I heard when he did the talk back in this virtual Boca event we did last month, during the Q&A, someone asked him and said, like, up to what age should you continue to do this exercise? And he said, I'd say probably 3 days after you're dead, because then just to make sure you're dead. So his philosophy is you work out even on the day you die, you work out. And that's what I'm talking about. That's the time to stop. So I plan to do that.
Love it. I love that. I definitely have been a high intensity interval person, but I haven't done like the 15-minute thing. I tend to exercise 30 minutes, but I'm very intrigued about it, and actually plan to experiment with that. I'm about being efficient. I'm about being efficient. So I think it's really important to make sure that we utilize any model of efficiency. So I appreciate that. And I will say this in terms of being able to deal with this idea of saying no to people, which I think is a big problem with not doing things you don't want to do. I recommend a book called Boundaries by Henry Cloud. And that book is helpful because it allows for us to know when to say no and do it in a loving way without causing harm to ourselves. So it's just a good book to consider. Boundaries by Henry Cloud. So any final thoughts, any final takeaways before we wrap up?
Yeah, I don't know. If obviously if you're on board with all of this stuff, with a lot of people that listen to this podcast hopefully are, but the people that aren't, the whole point of creating this organization was to give people a place where they could go and learn and be confident that what they were learning was not just internet rubbish. So, Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners, if you search for that, metabolicpractitioners.org. Go and there's a bunch of free stuff on there. Obviously there's more stuff if you become a member, but come and learn and understand. And if you realize that this is something that's important, then you may feel that the benefits of joining are worth it. And even if you don't, as a practitioner, you can register to be on our list of practitioners. You don't have to be a member. You can just put your information in there and you'll be listed. If you become a member, if you become accredited, then obviously those badges are displayed in your profile as well, which helps. But you don't have to be. And it's a start. put yourself in there. If you're open to the conversation, put your information in there, and then start learning. And hopefully, that will encourage you to join us as a member down the road. Yeah, just learn as much as you can.
I agree.
And don't accept everything, everybody, including me. Don't accept on face value what anybody says to you. Go out and research it for yourself, and make your own decision.
Right. That sounds like a plan. I really appreciate that. And I think we all should be comfortable with what we know, what we don't know. And we have to research who we are, what's being stated by the person in front of us. Just because you're the CEO of LowCarb USA doesn't make you the perfect expert on low carb. And I think, yeah. So I love that. So thank you. So thank you for being here today. And I really appreciate you. Of course, again, it's all being recorded, so I'll have to honor what we talked about earlier. And I'm looking forward to it and excited to do it. So as I kind of wrap up, guys, for all you guys watching and listening today, we had the pleasure of having a conversation with one of the pioneers in the low carb space, a man who, in partnership with his wife, Pam, is making a difference. And, books like The Dietitian's Dilemma, which was written by my previous guest, Michelle Hearn, may not be necessary if we have a way to support a nutrition professional who's trying to teach low carb, keto, and carnivore. And so hopefully, as we develop the society and we provide that support, the nutrition professionals will be comfortable, the pharmacists will be comfortable, the docs will be comfortable, everybody will be comfortable. And then we can kind of allow them to teach this way of eating. So for all of you who are frustrated seeing clinicians who are either afraid or fearful of supporting you on your journey of metabolic health, help is finally here. I encourage each and every one of you to check out the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners website. When you do, I want you guys to check out their clinical guidelines. I want you to check out their forms, the accreditation steps, and their other educational opportunities. This is really a game changer, but it will need all of us to ensure that what is not known by others becomes known, and we have a place we can send people now. So I hope today's episode has really added value to your life. And as always, I ask that all you guys be safe, be well, and continue to protect your nest.